The stone floor of the great hall was always cold, no matter the season. Nova had learned this fact over 7 long years, the same way she had learned all the other unspoken rules of the castle. Her footsteps, soft as they were, seemed to echo in the vast empty space. She was the Luna, the queen of the mighty Nightfang pack, and yet she often felt like a ghost drifting through the corridors of her own home. A home she shared with her husband, the Alpha King Lucian, a man who was more of a shadow to her than a partner. From the very beginning, their marriage had been one of silence and distance. She remembered her wedding day, a grand affair where hundreds of wolves from all across the territory had gathered to see their king unite with a strong, kind-hearted she-wolf from a respected bloodline. She had worn a gown of silver, and he had stood tall and imposing in his ceremonial armor. Their eyes had met during the ceremony, and for a single heart-stopping moment, Nova had seen a flicker of something in his deep gray eyes, not warmth but perhaps curiosity. She had dared to hope. That hope had been extinguished by nightfall. There was no shared chambers, no gentle first touch, no whispered promises. He had given her a stiff nod, said, "The castle is yours to manage, Luna," and had walked away down a different hallway. And he had kept walking away, every single day since. Her days fell into a lonely pattern. She would wake in her large, canopied bed, the space beside her perpetually empty and smooth. She would break her fast alone in the morning room, listening to the sounds of the castle stirring to life. Lucian was always gone before dawn, tending to patrols, settling disputes, training with his warriors. He was a good king, a fair and strong leader for their pack, and no one could deny that. But he was not a husband. Their paths would sometimes cross in the afternoon. She might be in the library and he would enter to retrieve a map. The air would grow still and heavy. He would look at her, his gaze a complex mix of things she could never quite decipher. It wasn't anger, it wasn't dislike, but it was a powerful, deliberate wall. "Nova," he would say, her name a low rumble that never failed to send a shiver down her spine. Then he would look away. "The southern border reports are on your desk." And that would be it. Business. Always pack business. The only warmth Nova found was outside the castle walls, among the people of the pack. She spent her afternoons in the village, visiting the elderly, helping with the young pups in the nursery and working in the healing halls. The pack members loved her. They would smile and call out, "Luna Nova," and their children would cling to her skirts. She felt real there, needed and valued. It was a stark contrast to the invisible woman she became the moment she stepped back into the castle's shadow. Sometimes she would catch a glimpse of Lucian watching her from a distance, from his study window or the training grounds wall. His expression would be unreadable, but he would always turn and walk away the moment he saw her notice him. As the 7th year of their marriage wore on, the silence felt heavier than ever before. The coming of the winter solstice meant a grand pack gathering. It was a time for mates to celebrate their bond, for new pairs to be announced. The festive energy in the village only highlighted the cold stillness of her own life. One evening, seeking a moment of peace, Nova walked along the high battlements. The wind tugged at her cloak. Below, she saw 2 young warriors, a mated pair, laughing together as they walked, their hands entwined, their shoulders brushing. A pain, sharp and acute, pierced Nova's heart. It was a longing so deep it felt like a physical ache. She wrapped her arms around herself. This was not a life. This was an existence. She was a queen in a gilded cage, loved by everyone except the one person whose love was promised to her. A terrible, solid thought began to form in her mind, a thought that brought both terror and a strange, bleak sense of relief. She could not live like this anymore. Something, one way or another, had to change. The cold was no longer just in the stones, it was in her very soul, and she feared that soon, it would freeze her completely. The weight of kingship was a cloak Lucian wore every waking moment, a heavy, invisible mantle woven from duty, vigilance, and a silence that had become his closest companion. His study was a reflection of this burden, a large, orderly room of dark wood and towering bookshelves, lit by the flickering orange light of a great stone fireplace. It was here he spent most of his hours, away from the echoing halls and the painful reminder of the life he could not allow himself to have. The parchments before him detailed border patrol routes and grain storage reports, but his mind, as it so often did, was elsewhere. It had drifted to a memory from that afternoon. He'd been returning from the training grounds, his muscles aching, his mind focused on the new defensive maneuvers his beta was implementing, when the sound of laughter had stopped him in his tracks. It was a sound so rare and beautiful in the solemnity of the castle that it felt like a physical blow. He had stepped into the shadow of an archway and looked down into the sunlit courtyard. There was Nova. She was surrounded by a group of young pups from the village, their small faces turned up to hers in rapt attention. She was showing them how to weave small charms from winter berries and evergreen twigs, her fingers moving with a gentle grace. Her smile, so freely given to them, was a light that seemed to push back the perpetual twilight of his own world. He had watched, his breath caught in his throat as she knelt in the dirt, her simple dress ignoring the dust, to tie a charm around the smallest pup's wrist. The child had hugged her, and Nova had held her close, her eyes closing for a moment in what looked like pure, unguarded affection. The ache that bloomed in his chest then was a familiar, tormenting presence. It was a mixture of profound pride and a desolation so deep it threatened to swallow him whole. She was everything a Luna should be. She was strength and compassion woven together, a calm, steady presence for the pack he led with stern command. He knew the people adored her. He heard their whispers, saw the way their faces lit up when she passed. And he, their king, the man who should be standing proudly by her side, could only watch from the shadows, a ghost in his own castle, a stranger to his own wife. A soft knock at the heavy oak door broke the silence, a knock he recognized. "Enter Thomas," he said, his voice a low rumble. The door opened to reveal an older wolf, his dark hair streaked with silver, his face lined with the wisdom and scars of many years. Thomas had served his father and now served him, more of a trusted advisor and a stern, kind-hearted uncle than a mere member of the council. He stepped inside, his eyes sharp and knowing, missing nothing. "The patrols from the northern pass have returned," Thomas began, his tone formal for a moment before it softened. "But that is not what I am here to discuss, Lucian." He moved to stand before the large desk, his gaze not on the papers, but fixed intently on the Alpha King. "I watched you today. In the courtyard." Lucian's jaw tightened. He looked away towards the fire, its dancing flames a poor substitute for the warmth he had witnessed in the yard. "I do not know what you mean," he lied, the words tasting like ash. "You do," Thomas insisted, his voice gentle but unwavering. "You watched your wife as if she were a star in the sky, something brilliant and forever out of reach. It has been 7 years, Lucian. 7 years of this distance. The pack sees it. They feel the strain. They have a beloved Luna and a respected Alpha, but they do not have a united pair. It creates a weakness, a coldness that seeps into the very foundations of our home. But more than that, I see what it is doing to you. And I see the quiet sorrow in Nova's eyes when she thinks no one is looking. Why do you punish her? Why do you punish yourself?" The question hung in the air between them, the one question Lucian had spent 7 years building walls against. He stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the stone floor, and turned his back to Thomas, staring into the consuming fire as if he could find an answer in the embers. The silence stretched, thick and heavy. Thomas did not press, he simply waited, a patient and solid presence. Finally the words came, torn from a place of deep, old pain Lucian rarely allowed himself to visit. "It is not a punishment," he whispered, the confession feeling like a failure. "It is protection." "Protection?" Thomas asked, his confusion evident. "From what?" "The woman is a beacon of strength and gentleness. She is not a threat." "Not from her," Lucian said, his shoulders slumping as the weight of his secret began to crumble. He turned, and for the first time, Thomas saw not the formidable Alpha King but a man haunted. "From me. From the blood that runs in my veins." He took a ragged breath. "You knew my father. You served him. You saw the king he was in public, and the monster he could be in private. The image of his mother, a kind and gentle woman with eyes that grew sadder every year, flashed in his mind. He remembered the shouting, the sound of something breaking in another room, the way she would flinch sometimes when his father raised his hand too quickly. He claimed my mother as his mate with passion, but he ruled her with a fist. He said it was his right as Alpha. He said his temper, his cruelty, was the price of his strength. Lucian's own hands clenched into fists at his sides. This power inside me, this wolf, what if it is the same? What if the rage and the dominance that makes me a strong king is the very thing that would make me a terrible mate? What if, one day I lose control? What if I hurt her? The final words were barely audible, a fear-given voice after years of festering in silence. I could not bear it, Thomas. The thought of seeing fear in her eyes, the thought of causing her a moment of pain. It is better that I stay away. It is the only way I know to keep her safe. To keep that part of me, my father's legacy, far away from her. Thomas was silent for a long moment, absorbing the king's tortured confession. When he spoke, his voice was low and firm, filled with a conviction that brooked no argument. "Lucian," he said, Look at me. Reluctantly, the Alpha King met his gaze. You are not your father. Your strength is not his. Your heart is not his. You rule with fairness, not fear. You protect the weak, your father preyed upon them. This fear, it is a ghost. And in clinging to it, in building this wall between you and your destined mate, you are not protecting Nova. You are breaking her heart day by day. You are causing the very pain you seek to prevent. Your silence is your cruelty, not your strength. And it must end. The change in the air was the first warning. It was a metallic tang that cut through the usual evening scents of pine and hearth smoke, a static charge that made the fine hairs on Nova's arms stand on end. She was in her sitting room, attempting to focus on mending a cloak, but a deep, primal unease had settled in her stomach, making her fingers clumsy with the needle. The castle, for so long a place of quiet sorrow, suddenly felt like a pot about to boil over. From the distant walls, a lone, sharp howl pierced the twilight, not a call of communication but a clear, piercing alarm. It was followed by another, and then another, until the night was alive with a chorus of rising urgency. Down in his study, Lucian was on his feet in an instant. The reports were forgotten. The heavy wooden door flew open and his beta, a large wolf named Kale, stood there, his chest heaving. The Shadow Fang pack, Kale growled, his eyes already glowing with the light of his wolf. They've crossed the southern river. They're moving fast, heading straight for the village. There was no more time for thought, only for action. Lucian's body seemed to expand with the surge of power, his own wolf rising to the surface, its protective fury eclipsing all other concerns. Sound the general alarm, he commanded, his voice dropping to a guttural snarl. Protect the village. Everyone to their posts. He tore through the castle, his mind a map of tactics and defense, the image of Nova a bright, terrified flash in his mind that he forcefully pushed aside. He had to lead. But Nova did not wait for orders. The moment the first alarm sounded, her own instincts, the instincts of a true Luna, took over. The personal coldness of her life, the loneliness, all of it vanished, burned away by the immediate, clear danger to her people. She was not the king's ignored wife in that moment. She was the Luna of the Night Fang pack, and her place was with them. She ran from her room, not toward the safety of the inner keep, but down the winding staircases toward the main gates. The courtyard was a scene of controlled chaos. Warriors shifted into their powerful wolf forms, their growls rumbling like thunder. Women and children were being hurried into the great hall for safety. Nova's eyes scanned the crowd, assessing, planning. She saw a group of older pack members and very young pups who had been caught outside the main hall, huddled and terrified near the smithy. Without a second thought, she rushed to them, her voice calm and firm despite the racing of her heart. This way, she directed, herding them toward a side entrance that was closer and less congested. Quickly, but stay together. She helped an elderly wolf to his feet, supporting his weight. The night air was now thick with the sounds of snarls and clashing from beyond the walls. The attack was at their doorstep. It was in that moment of focused purpose, as she ushered the last of the group toward the door, that a section of the outer palisade, weakened by a previous storm, splintered inward with a sickening crack. A hulking, dark-furred wolf from the rival pack burst through the opening, its yellow eyes blazing with malice. It landed in the courtyard, its gaze immediately locking onto the easiest targets, the slow-moving elders and the terrified children Nova was protecting. A snarl ripped from its throat as it lunged. Time seemed to slow. Nova saw the attack coming. She saw the fear on the faces of those she guarded. There was no weapon in her hand, no powerful wolf inside her to meet the threat. There was only her will. She did not run. Instead, she moved, placing herself squarely between the threat and her people, her arms spread wide as if her mere presence could form a shield. The rogue wolf, surprised by the defiance of an unshifted female, collided with her. She felt a searing, white-hot pain explode in her side as its claws raked across her. The force of the impact threw her backward onto the hard stone of the courtyard, a cry torn from her lips. At that exact moment, Lucian, a massive, terrifying storm of black fur and fury, emerged from the main fray near the gates. His powerful senses had been tracking the fight, but a new scent flooded his nostrils, the coppery, unmistakable scent of Nova's blood. His head snapped toward the courtyard and he saw her. He saw her fall. The world narrowed to that single horrifying image. A roar erupted from him, a sound of such pure, unadulterated rage and terror that it shook the very stones of the castle. The rival wolf that had hurt her barely had time to turn before Lucian was upon it. The fight was not a contest, it was an annihilation. His attack was swift, brutal and final. The moment the threat was eliminated, He did not pause to survey the rest of the battle. He shifted back into his human form in a fluid, frantic motion and was at Nova's side in 3 long strides. The cold, distant king was gone, utterly erased. His face was a mask of raw panic, his hands trembling as he dropped to his knees beside her. "Nova," he breathed, her name a prayer, a curse, a plea. His fingers, so careful, so gentle, brushed the hair back from her face. Her eyes were closed, her skin pale. The dark stain of blood was spreading across her dress. The sight of it, the proof of her injury, of her bravery, of his failure to protect her, shattered the last of his iron control. He gathered her limp form into his arms, cradling her against his chest as if she were made of the most fragile glass. He could feel the faint, shallow beat of her heart against his own. The feel of her in his arms, after 7 years of denying himself even the briefest touch, was both heaven and hell. He rose, holding her close, and his voice, when he spoke to his stunned warriors, was thick with an emotion no one had ever heard from him before. "Secure the walls. The fight is over." And without another word, he turned and carried his Luna, his wife, back into the castle, his every step a silent vow, his every breath a promise that things would never be the same again. The silence in Nova's bedchamber was a heavy, living thing, broken only by the soft crackle of the fire that Thomas had hastily lit upon their return. It was a room Lucian had deliberately avoided for 7 years, a sanctuary that was not his, a space that held the subtle, floral scent of her that he had only ever caught in passing. Now he stood in the center of it, the weight of Nova in his arms, feeling both profoundly right and a terrifying condemnation. He had carried her from the courtyard, his steps swift and sure, his entire being focused on the single vital task of getting her to safety, to comfort. He had laid her on the large bed with an aching tenderness, his hands lingering for a moment on her shoulders before he forced himself to step back, allowing the pack's head healer to step in. He did not leave the room. He stood like a statue of grief and guilt near the fireplace, his arms crossed tightly over his chest, his knuckles white. He watched, his breath held in his lungs, as the healer, an elderly woman named Ilara, carefully cleaned the deep claw marks on Nova's side. Each hiss of pain from Nova, even in her semi-conscious state, felt like a lash against his own soul. Every time she flinched, his own body tensed in response. He saw the stark red of the wounds against her pale skin, a visual brand of his failure. He, the Alpha King, the one whose sole purpose was to protect his pack, his Luna, had failed. The enemy had breached his walls and had hurt the one person he had sworn, in the deepest, most secret part of his heart, to keep safe above all others. His carefully constructed wall of distance had not protected her. It had left her exposed and vulnerable. Ilara worked efficiently, applying a pungent salve and wrapping Nova's torso in clean, white bandages. "The wounds are deep, Alpha," she said, her voice quiet but firm, "but they will heal. She has lost blood and will be weak, but her spirit is strong. She needs rest now. True rest." She gave Lucian a long, knowing look before gathering her supplies and quietly slipping from the room, closing the door behind her and leaving him alone with his wife. The quiet click of the latch seemed to echo in the sudden stillness. Lucian was alone with Nova, truly alone, for the first time since their wedding night. The fire cast dancing shadows across her face, highlighting the delicate arch of her brows, the soft curve of her lips. She was so beautiful it made his chest ache. He found himself moving, drawn to her side as if by an invisible cord his will could no longer fight. He pulled a velvet-covered chair close to the bed and sat, the fight and the fear finally draining from his body, leaving behind a hollowed-out exhaustion and a clarity that was as sharp as broken glass. He watched the slow, steady rise and fall of her breathing, his own breath sinking with hers. He reached out, his movements hesitant, and his fingers, calloused from years of wielding a sword, gently brushed a strand of dark hair from her damp forehead. The contact was electric. It was the first time he had willingly, tenderly touched her. Her skin was soft, so incredibly soft. A low, wounded sound escaped him, a mix of awe and agony. This was what he had denied himself. This simple, profound connection. Hours passed. The moon climbed high outside the window, its silver light mingling with the fire's gold. Lucian did not move from her side. He kept his vigil, his gaze never leaving her face, his hand now resting gently over hers on the coverlet. He was reliving every moment of the last 7 years, seeing them not through the lens of his own fear, but through what they must have looked like to her. The cold greetings. The averted gaze. The empty chair beside him at every feast. The lonely nights in this very room. He saw the strength it must have taken for her to face each day with her head held high, to pour her love into a pact that was not hers by blood, to live in a home where she was respected but not cherished. Thomas's words echoed in his mind, no longer a criticism but a stark, undeniable truth. You are breaking her heart day by day. Your silence is your cruelty. A soft moan pulled him from his torment. Nova's eyelids fluttered and then slowly she opened them. Her gaze was hazy with pain and the remnants of a healing sleep, but it focused on him, on his face so close to hers, on his hand covering hers. Confusion swam in her eyes, then a flicker of something else, not fear, never fear from her, but a deep, weary uncertainty. It was that look, that quiet, wounded confusion, that broke the final dam inside him. The words he had locked away for 7 years, the confession, the plea, everything he was, surged to the surface, and he could not have stopped them if he tried. His grip on her hand tightened, not painfully, but with a desperate need for connection. Nova, he began, his voice a raw, broken whisper, so unlike his usual commanding tone. I've been a fool. A coward. He swallowed hard, his gray eyes, usually so guarded, now blazing with a torrent of unveiled emotion. All these years, my distance, it was never because of you. Never. You must believe that. He took a shuddering breath, the words tumbling out now in a rushed, fervent confession. It was because of me. A fear, a sickness in my own heart. He looked down at their joined hands, unable to bear the intensity in her waking eyes. My father, he was a monster to my mother. He claimed her with passion, but he ruled her with a fist and a temper. I saw the light in her eyes die year by year. And I have his blood. I have this power, this rage that makes me a strong alpha, and I was so terrified, Nova. I was terrified that the same darkness was in me. That if I let myself get close to you, if I truly became your husband, that one day I would lose control and I would hurt you. The thought of seeing you look at me with fear, the thought of causing you a single moment of the pain my mother endured. I could not bear it. I thought my silence, my distance, was the only way to keep you safe. To shield you from the monster I feared lived inside of me. Tears, hot and shameful, welled in his eyes, but he did not wipe them away. He lifted his gaze back to hers, his expression one of utter devastation and pleading. But I was wrong. So wrong. I see that now. My silence did not protect you. It only made you lonely. It left you to face danger alone in that courtyard. My fear caused the very pain I sought to prevent. His voice dropped to a hushed, fervent whisper, laced with a longing so profound it shook his entire frame. Seeing you fall tonight, Nova, it was like my own heart had been torn from my chest. I have never known such terror. Please, please, you have to forgive me. Forgive this foolish, broken king. I cannot. I will not live another day without you by my side, not as a stranger, but as your husband, your mate. Please, he begged, the word leaving his lips not as a command, but as the most vulnerable plea of his life. Let me claim you. Let me love you. Let me spend the rest of my life proving that I can be the man you deserve. For a long, suspended moment, the only sound in the room was the crackling of the fire and the ragged echo of Lucian's confession hanging in the air between them. Nova lay perfectly still, her mind, still clouded by pain and healing herbs, struggling to process the torrent of words. The cold king, the distant husband who had been a fortress of silence for 7 long years, was now on his knees beside her, his face streaked with tears he made no effort to hide, his soul laid bare. She saw not a trace of the stern, unapproachable Alpha. In his eyes she saw only a man, a wounded, terrified and profoundly remorseful man. The puzzle of their life together, with its countless lonely nights and unanswered questions, suddenly clicked into a heartbreaking, perfect picture. It was never a rejection of her. It was a battle within him, a war waged against ghosts. Her own eyes filled with tears, but they were not tears of sadness. They were tears of release, of a weight she had carried for so long finally being lifted. She slowly, carefully, moved her hand from under his, and for a fleeting second she saw a flicker of devastating fear in his gaze, as if he believed she was pulling away for good. But instead, she turned her palm upward and laced her fingers through his, her grip surprisingly firm despite her weakness. The touch was an answer, a acceptance, a bridge across the 7-year chasm. Lucian, she whispered, her voice hoarse but clear. The sound of his name on her lips, spoken with such tenderness, made him shudder. All this time, I thought it was me. I thought I was not enough. That I had failed you as a Luna, as a wife. She gave his hand a gentle squeeze. Your fear. I cannot imagine carrying such a burden. But you are not your father. You could never be him. She looked at their joined hands, then back into his stormy gray eyes, her gaze steady and sure. A monster does not weep for the pain he might cause. A monster does not kneel and beg for forgiveness. The man I see before me now is the man I have always hoped was there. And I have waited for him for 7 years. A single tear traced a path down her temple into her hair. There is nothing to forgive. A sound, half a sob, half a groan of profound relief, broke from Lucian's chest. He brought her hand to his lips, pressing a fervent, lingering kiss to her knuckles, his shoulders shaking with the force of his emotion. It was a gesture of reverence, of devotion, of a love that had finally been permitted to break the surface. The rest of the night unfolded not with the fierce, possessive passion of a typical wolf claiming, but with a slow, aching tenderness that spoke of years of pent-up longing and a deep, abiding care. He did not leave her side. He helped her sip water, his hand cradling the back of her head with an impossible gentleness. He adjusted her pillows, his touch always feather-light as if she might break. He spoke to her, his voice a low, intimate murmur, telling her of the small, countless times he had watched her from afar, of the pride he felt when he saw her with the pack, of the way her laughter, though rarely heard by him, had always been the most beautiful sound in the world. He confessed it all, baring his heart completely, making up for 7 years of silence with 7 hours of unwavering honesty. As the first hints of dawn painted the sky in soft shades of rose and gold, Lucian finally, carefully, lay down beside her on the large bed. He did not crowd her, mindful of her injury, but he curled his body around hers, his chest to her back, his arm draped over her waist, his hand splayed protectively over her stomach. His face was buried in her hair, breathing in her scent, now mingled with his own. It was here, in the quiet safety of this embrace, that the final, sacred bond was sealed. It was not a dramatic or forceful act, but a quiet, spiritual surrender. A soft, golden light, visible only to their souls, enveloped them warm and pulsating. It was the mate bond, dormant for so long, snapping into place with a rightness that felt like coming home. It was a gentle, unbreakable thread of love, trust, and promise now tying their lives together forever. A contented sigh escaped them both in unison, and for the first time, Nova fell into a truly deep, peaceful sleep, feeling safe, cherished, and utterly complete. When she awoke hours later, the winter sun was streaming brightly into the room. The pain in her side was a dull, manageable ache, but it was overshadowed by a new, vibrant sensation humming through her entire being, the steady, warm, powerful presence of Lucian in her mind and heart. He was already awake, propped on one elbow, simply watching her. The look in his eyes was one of pure, unguarded adoration. "Good morning, my Luna," he said, his voice husky with sleep and love. "Good morning, my mate," she replied, a true, radiant smile, the first of its kind she had ever given him, spreading across her face. The change in the castle was palpable to everyone. When Lucian helped a still weak Nova walk down to the great hall for the evening meal, they did not walk as a king and his subject, but as partners. His arm was around her, supporting her, his touch possessive yet tender. He pulled out her chair himself, his hand resting on her shoulder for a moment before he took his own seat beside her, his attention fully on her. The pack could feel it too, a new warmth, a new strength that radiated from their united Alpha and Luna. The cold shadow that had lingered over the Night Fang pack for years had finally been banished by the dawning of a new united era. The story of Lucian and Nova, of a cold king and his lonely queen, of 7 years of silence broken by a single night of courage and truth, has found its happy beginning. Their life as true mates is just starting, a new chapter filled with a love that was worth the wait. If you want to be there to share in more stories like this, to discover other tales of fractured hearts mended and love that conquers all fear, make sure to subscribe. A new world of romance and adventure is always just a click away.